What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we are updating Cyber Dragons. With the release of Crystal Revenge, we did get Clockwork Knight, which was a card that Cyber Dragon players have been expecting quite a while, and it is a card that helps the deck immensely, even both going first and going second, because people think like a spell DNA Surgery is only going to be good going second with Cyber Dragons by turning everything into machines and then going for a big Fortress Dragon, but no, there are some things that can help you going first with this card, which we're going to talk about once we get profiles. So, before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the monsters, we play 3 copies of Cyber Dragon. Now this is not a very trap heavy build of Cyber Dragons. If you're playing like of that build, then you can only need to play 1 Cyber Dragon, but we do play cards like Machine Duplication and we do play Galaxy Soldier, so we do need a lot of targets in order to use these cards, so we do max out this card. It's very searchable with a lot of means, and going second, when you're going with the Clockwork Knight and special summoning Cyber Dragon, your opponent either has to have ways to deal with a lot of cards before they even hit the board, or they're going to lose their entire board to Fortress Dragon by turning everything to machine. So this card becomes a really big threat going second once your opponent lets Clockwork Knight resolve. We play 3 copies of Cyber Dragon Core. This is pretty standard. It's the best normal summon in the deck, searching all your cyber spells and traps. When it's in the graveyard, if you control no monsters and your opponent has a monster, you banish it to get a Cyber Dragon monster for your deck. Amazing card. 3 copies of Cyber Dragon Hers. This card is a recovery, and it's also giving you some searching power, because not only is it going to give you Cyber Dragons when you pitch for cards like Galaxy Soldier to have extra targets, but during the grind game, when this card goes to the graveyard, you can even get back Core from the grave because it treated as a Cyber Dragon while on the field in the graveyard. So this card gives you a lot of resources during the grind game and for the discard outlets that you need. We play 1 copy of Naxter. Naxter is a recovery card that helps you get more cards back from the graveyard. It's a searchable card that you can get whenever you need. It's not the best card to see during the early game, so you only want to search this when your graveyard is full of Cyber Dragons, and mostly what the card you want to bring back this card is Cyber Dragon Infinity, to using its negate effect and to suck more monsters. We play 1 copy of Cyber Dragon Veer. This is a really good card when you want to chain block your Cyber Dragon Core. If you have your core in the hand and you have a way to search another Cyber Dragon, like an emergency or something, you can search this card to make sure that your core resolves, and then you get a free special on the field, go for a card like Seeger, so it does help that as well. We do play 3 copies of Galaxy Soldier. You need to max out on this card because in the format we are right now, either you're getting a lot of interruptions on the board or you're not going to be able to play at all, because Ishizu Tier Elements can play through a lot of stuff, so you need to be able to get at least 2 interruptions, the least, when you play any deck. So when you're playing first with this deck, you need to be able to set up your Infinity, you need to be able to set your Overflow, and then we also play other cards that you can use to get more interruptions on the board. So maxing out Galaxy Soldier means that you don't have to waste Core's search for your Cyber Repair plan, because you can also hard draw this card more often, so you can use it to get your Infinity on board. We play 3 copies of Therion King Regulus. This is another card that can get you to another interruption. It's very easy to get on the board because we are playing a machine deck, so you're going to have any machine in the graveyard, and we also play the field spell to search this card, and it's also an Earth Machine monster, which I'm going to talk about right after why that is important. Now, moving on to the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Clockwork Knight. Now, let's break down what this card does and see exactly how good it is. So, the main thing that it does is that it makes everything machine on the field, so it's the effect that most people know it for, because they always knew this card was going to make Fortress Dragon really good. Back in the day when Cyber Dragons were not nearly as a competitive deck, more like engines and stuff, people used to use cards like DNA Surgery to turn everything into machine, and then go for Cyber Dragon for a big fortress to destroy your opponent's entire board. This card makes it more consistent because it's not a trap card, it's a spell card, so you can just activate it going second. If your opponent allows it, then they need to make sure that none of your Cyber Dragons hit the board, because if they do, you can just take everything away from their field. It also has other effects as well, so it boosts all your monsters, machine monsters, by 500 attack and defense, and it lowers the attack of your opponent's machine monsters by 500 attack and defense. So all your monsters are going to be 1,000 points stronger, pretty much, compared to what your opponent has, and it also has a third effect that you can banish this card from the graveyard, discard a card, and add an Earth Machine from your deck to your hand. So if your opponent deals with this card, you can also use its graveyard effect to get a Regulus in hand, which is important to play Therion Regulus, at least 1 copy if you even want to play the deck more budget, because the deck can get a little bit more expensive with Regulus, even though it's not nearly as expensive as it first came out, but you need to play at least 1 copy in order to have something to search with this card, or you can even try some other Earth Machines, but again, Regulus is the card that you always want to be searching with this card because of how powerful it is. We play 3 copies of Cyber Emergency. This is pretty standard, it searches all your Cyber Dragon cards. If your opponent negates the activation of this card, because a lot of people don't know how to play against this deck, then you can pitch a card, add this card back to your hand, and then activate it again. So if you're playing against this deck, never negate this card's activation. You can ash it freely, but never use an effect that negates the activation on Cyber Emergency. For some searchable one-offs, we play 1 copy of Repair Plan. This is mainly to search Galaxy Soldier if you don't have access to it, and you need to have a machine in the grave to activate it, so this is why we need to play Almiraz and the extra deck go when you summon your Cyber Dragon Core and then search this card. We play 1 copy of Rev System. them, this card revives a Cyber Dragon from the graveyard. You do sometimes need an extra extender to go for Seeger, to go for a big push, which is why you play this card. We play one copy of Cyberload Fusion. This card gets you access to your Chimera Rampage Dragon, which is the OTK machine of the deck. You can clear your opponent's board. This card is going to clear your opponent's back row. It's going to attack 3 times. It's a really good card. We do play 3 copies of Machine Duplication. When you resolve this card in Cyber Dragon, it feels just so satisfying. Getting access to free 2 Cyber Dragons from the deck because all your monsters treat as Cyber Dragons, getting Nova, getting a Revive a monster, getting Infinity, really good stuff. We play 3 copies of Theory and Colosseum. You need to max out on this card as well just because of how broke this card is. This card not only protects your monsters, it gives you recovery on top of searching your Theory and Rangulus. So since we don't play any other field spell in the deck, it's going to stick to the field for a long time, and if your opponent doesn't answer this, the amount of advantage you're going to be able to get this card is immense. So yeah, this card gives you access to your big monsters, protects them, and gives them back to you when they get dealt. We play 3 copies of Silent Graveyard in the main deck. Now, this is a meta call. If you don't have any Shizu tier elements in your format, then of course you can switch with card with pretty much anything else that you want, but in the scenario that you're going to play against the most represented deck, which is what's going to happen more of the time, you need to play a card like this in order to be able to survive, because unfortunately the new Banlist that came out pretty much did nothing. We hit the tier 0 format, so we still have to play cards like this in order to combat the meta, and this card is a card that is basically an Abyss Dweller for a single turn. You cannot summon Abyss Dweller in a deck like this, the levels just don't match, so playing a card like this, even going second, helps you play around your opponent's disruptions like Dora, Keldon, or the tier elements in the grave, and going first, you can activate this as a quick play for a Floodgate, and hopefully get your turn back after this, and then you can OTK, because Cyber Dragons, all they need is 2 turns in order to close out games, so this card can help that. We play 1 copy of Call by the Grave, of course, another meta card that has always been good, and this format, it's even better than it used to be just because of how popular the Grave is. For the trap cards, we play 1 copy of Cybernetic Overflow. You don't really need to play more copies of this card, because again, you only need to get back 1 turn in order to be able to win the game, so you need to search with your core, and then you have your disruption ready, and on top of pretty much anything else that you have, like a Nova, or a Therion, and all the other cards, and we also play another card that is going to give more interruption, so all of these are meant to give you your turn back after you pass turn. And the last card that we play in the main deck is 3 copy of Rivalry of Woods. Now, this is not only just a good card in general, this format, because it really is, it also helps a lot with Clockwork Knight, which is why I said that Clockwork Knight is really good going first as well. You can see this pretty much as a Zombie War Rivalry combo when you play in zombies. You turn everything into a specific type you want, and then once you flip this card, if your opponent doesn't play a deck that has the type in their hand, they will not be able to summon anything at all. So by turning everything into machines, if you combine this with a Rivalry of Warlords, the moment your opponent summons a monster, you flip this card, and your opponent is not going to be able to do anything for the rest of the turn. You're going to get your turn back. All your monsters are machines, you don't really care, so you can just attack for game, and you're going to be happy. So we need to play cards like this in order to fight in tier 0 format. Cyber Dragons are no exception. They have to play like that in order to be able to survive, so we need to play Floodgates to make sure that we can have somewhat of a chance. For the extra deck, we play 2 copies of Fortress Dragon. You can even play a 3rd copy of this card, but I am playing 2 copies of the next card as well because of the format has switched a little bit compared to what it used to be, so I don't feel like you're ever going to need the 3rd copy, because if you need the 3rd copy, you are in such a grind game that Cyber Dragons do not really have the means to pretty much outplay your opponents, so yeah, you just being able to use away your opponent's monsters and attack monsters, the grindier the game gets, which is why Clockwork Knight is also great, because it helps you pretty much have great top decks in the deck. Any Cyber Dragon monster, if your Clockwork Knight is on the field, you can always get rid of your opponent's monsters. But I also played 2 copies of Mega Fleet Dragon. Now, this card is better than it was like a couple formats ago when Branded Despia and Sword Souls were best decks, but now, with the release of Sprite, we did get a lot of good Link monsters that are not only playable in Sprite, because we all know that Sprite Elf is a card that you see in a lot of other decks, so being able to destroy those cards before they even get a chance to use their effects is really good, even if you don't get a chance to establish the Clockwork Knight effect. So yeah, this is why we do play 2 copies of this card as well. There are cards like Appaloosa still in the meta, and a lot of other cards, so you need to be able to clear the extra monster zone on top of being able to have access to Fortress in case you draw Clockwork Knight. We do play 1 copy of Rampage Dragon. You don't need to play anything else. You don't need to play Cyber Twin. It's not going to come up as often as possible because you only need to fuse from the field in order to summon Cyber Twin, but by fusing from the field and banish the zone with Cyberload Fusion to summon this card is good enough to be able to go for game. We played 2 copies of Cyber Dragon Nova. We all know this card. It gives you back a monster from the graveyard, and it summons one of the 2 copies of Cyber Dragon Infinity on top of it, which is another one of the interruptions you play in the deck, destroys your opponent's board by getting monsters under it as material, and it's a Omni Negate on legs. We also play 1 Chronomaly Vinama. This card is a card that you can summon when you have both Machine Duplication and Galaxy Soldier. You need to be able to summon another rank 5 that is going to be interruption, because unfortunately you can only summon Infinity once per turn on top of Nova, so you're not going to be able to summon both of them at the same time. But this card not only is a machine, because you don't really care if you're under your own rivalry, so it works better than Pleiades, but it's a card that can negate another monster effect, so it can give you some somewhat more of an interruption to be able to play around your opponent. We have one copy of Sky Thunder Zeus, another Xyz that is a machine monster, so it works perfectly under Rivalry. You can summon this on top of your Infinity or your Vimana, depending on what your field looks like, to be able to break your opponent's board more. And for the Link monsters, we just have a couple of Link ones and the Cyber Dragon Link monster. We have one copy of Anima, which goes with 2 play heroes, so if our opponent missteps and puts a monster under the extra monster zone, we can punish them with this card. One copy of Link Kuribo. This is here in just case you want to link away your heroes to get back a card, so you can use to pretty much get back your core or anything else and get a monster that can stop one of your opponent's attacks. We have one copy of Almiraz because we need this card in the extra deck in order to be able to activate Cyber Repair Plan turn 1 by linking away our core. And we also play one copy of Cyber Dragon Seeger, which helps with OTKs by doubling the attack points of one of the cards, mainly Rampage, because we can attack 3 times with a 42k beater. There is no way your opponent is going to be able to survive an attack like this after getting their board broken by Fortress Dragon, a Mega Fleet, or all of the other cards that we have in the deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Cyber Dragons got even more powerful, and because of how the deck is, we can always expect to get even more support down the road, because Konami always loves GX decks and DM decks. They just will always give us more cards to work with, so we just hope that these cards are going to be good. And we're still in Tier 0 format, unfortunately, but if you're a fan of other decks, then you can try to have somewhat of a chance by playing cards that are just mainly to counter the best deck Ishizu tier elements with cards like Rivalry, Silent Graveyard. I know, Konami did not do their job this time of fixing Tier 0 format, but we can't do anything about that, so if we want to play something else, we just have to find a way to defeat the best deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.